problem. So if you try to teach someone to agree with failure, you will fail, because the concept.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
The concept is responsibility, and the problem in Europe is that to take a decision, you have layers of decision. If you take a small or big companies, no one wants to take the responsibility of the decision. So you build into the cover your ass concept or syndrome. So you big companies or family companies. This is the problem of the SMEs in Europe, that you don't want to take the responsibility and you try to push the responsibility somewhere else. So if we take the culture of Israel, and it's not only because the army that the youth take responsibility or risk responsibility very, very quickly, and they have to, and if they have a tank to drive, even if they are not officers, they have to take decisions very quickly. And so it's a structural, but it's also in your daily life. And also the fact that we are immigrant, still immigrant society, like in the States, like the new frontier of California. So you understand that you have to take your own responsibility to do something. If you are convinced that you go on your own responsibility, you will agree with failure. The problem is when you refuse your responsibility, so it's maybe chicken and egg, but through given responsibility, you can overcome the problem of failure. And just on the when we discuss, I have a French accent because I'm born in France, so I do a little bit Europe, and travel a lot to Brussels and so on. And when we sell the programs, the European program here, we say that we have to meet, because responsibility and self-decision can very quickly get to mess. This is alles klar, in order, so you can't give to everyone to take decision in Germany. But in Germany, they know what is order. But sometimes when you do too much order, you are rigid. So the beauty of the program, and I have to say the programs, is to have the Israeli best with the German and European rigidity, and minus by minus is plus. So that's the idea, that of the program, that we can meet together and work together with our own strength. But I think that this idea of non-failure, it's because we are in immigration and we have to take risks if we want to build roots.
Just add, thank you. There's indeed scientific evidence in Germany that immigrants become rather earlier entrepreneur and take their fate into their own hands, and which is interesting, and which also is like evidence there's that some of the Arab Israeli, the percentage is higher than amongst the average Israeli to excel and to become private entrepreneur. But I also, it's like mentality is a question that obviously lasts until sunset, and can be, because everyone has something to say about it, and everybody has obviously his or her observations. Very often, it's obviously the individual, and very often it's part of the structure and part of the Israeli success that we, at least in my view, my humble view, is the chief scientist of the Israeli ministry. It's something that is very unique, and I think it's a part of the jigsaw that becomes very effective. Is there, I think Avi Masson was here. Is there anyone here from the chief scientists? Marcel, you're the only one?
No, next to
Rana Arad. Well, there are 5 chairs there, Rana. Could you please come up? Would be great. You get the mic. No, not Marcel, Rana. It's because very often it's like there's an old saying by Bertolt Brecht. He said, Caesar conquered Le Gaulle. Sorry, Marcel. Caesar conquered what's today France. And Brecht is asking is, didn't he have even a cook with him? And very often we talk about the Obama administration, which means a lot of people giving advice to Barack Obama. And the chief scientist is not the chief scientist, but there are smart people behind it. It's a real think tank. And I just wanted to shed some light today's glorious day on the people behind Marcel and everyone else who is supporting that. Can you please, because we have a number of people from around Europe who may not be very familiar with the chief scientist, could you please explain, what are you doing?
So,
and am I wrong?
The concept of the chief scientist in Israel is actually to complement the private investment ecosystem, because in fact Israel is well known for the percentage of investment in R&D as percentage of the GDP, but most of that comes from private sources like VCs, angels, and especially big corporations. You know that in Israel there are many large international corporations that have offices in Israel. However, some part of it comes from the government, and this is the chief scientist. The chief scientist has a budget of about $400 million per year. There are about 40 different programs. The incubators, which has become a program which has become well known. We have a program called Dufa, which focuses on early stage entrepreneurs. But the largest part of the 400 million goes to what is called the R&D fund, which actually every Israeli company, every company registered in Israel can apply to get a grant from that fund. And the important thing here is that when you look at the private investment sector, they are biased. VCs and angels are always interested in the flavor of the month, in something that's sexy, that will get them, high returns, obviously, because they are for profit. And the chief scientist is there to complement them, because if you have an excellent startups in the nanomaterials area, which is a very important area, no VC in Israel would invest in them. They're not your hip, cool mobile application or whatever, but the chief scientist does. He gives them grants, and you see this in materials, in biotechnology, which is always very difficult to digest for VCs, and many other interesting areas. So the importance of the chief scientist is to complement the private investment sector. Of course, there's a whole process of getting the grant, which you could go into in detail, and I always say that there are three strings attached. First, it's a partial grant, 30 to 50%. You have to show that you have the other part out of your own pocket. The second thing is that if you fail revenue-wise, you don't have to return the grant, but if you succeed, it becomes a loan, and you have to start gradually paying it over years. And actually 30% of the 400 million comes from repayments. And the third thing is there are limitations on getting the IP outside of Israel. So for example, when Google bought Waze, and they wanted to re-register the IP in the US, they had to pay a fine of, I think Waze got $1 million from the chief scientist, so Google paid $3 million as a fine. There's a formula. Since it was an acquisition of $1 billion, and since it's Google, it didn't matter a lot, but because it's government money, there are some implications. Any Israeli company can apply. More than 50% get grants. I mean, there's 120 freelance evaluators in all areas that actually come to evaluate you on your premises, and they write a report. But more than 50% of the companies get grants, and it's clearly one of the important driving forces behind the ecosystem. So, in a nutshell, that's the chief scientist.
Thank you, Rana. I think I find these stories extremely helpful, and the work you do is extremely important for the entire ecosystem. Because to find the one girl that is lovely and sexy, sometimes easy, at least for most men. But to find those that may be overlooked and help them to give them a second life, that I think is very important. My neighbor is helping. There's a German Bank for Economic Aid, which is something started in 1971, and they received a government grant at the beginning, and said, you can invest everywhere in the world, but important is it must be a third world country. Second is no financing available for that project. So they only look at all those projects that have been turned down by their local banks or the local financing system. And until today, they're profitable since 1971. They have had bad investments, but they haven't had a bad year since then. But again, unlike VCs, they're not forced to produce a certain margin. They're not forced to produce high yield. They're produced to be productive. And I think that's a very good support for an ecosystem. And I think that's one of the issues, the institutions that Europe can probably learn. But Laszlo wanted to add something. He's the wisest of us all. And that's hopefully, I guess, the perfect final word.
I just wanted to add, which is very nicely connects to what you have said regarding the EU granting programs. There is a significant difference what we can see here. This soft loan kind of solution. So if you fail, you don't have to pay back. If you are successful, you have to pay back. Now, in a case of EU, there is a completely different logic. First of all, these are grants. So if you use it, great. And then comes in an additional concept, the sustainability. So you have to prove that if you got a grant, you have to prove it by the application and then later on by the audits, that you can sustain the results, what you have achieved through the grant, for at least 2 years or 3 years. Now this is in some cases, obviously, this is very important. So if you build a highway and you got a grant for it, obviously the highway should be kept up and used. And I don't continue with examples. But if you build a startup, if you require the 2 years after you have finished the project, sustain it, what kind of effect does it have? That people are afraid of killing a company, although it should have been killed, and probably those who failed, I mean, in the cases if it doesn't produce anything, and the people would be liberated to do something else in the same amount of time till they try to cover that actually this is not a failure. And this is, I think, this is a big problem. And even in Horizon 2020, and also in some local granting systems. And here we have something that we should change, and this is connected also to this failure issue. So you said that, okay, it's very hard, and I'm also against making nations, characterizing nations, that this one is like that and that's one is like that, although everyone does it. But here there is a strong issue that you can see and pinpoint where actually this complete unacceptance that not everything is successful in life. Sometimes you have to reckon with that, but we don't do that in Europe. We don't do that in Horizon 2020, and we don't do that in many, I don't know of many national programs, but I know some of them, including ours, that the same concept prevails. And that's something we should change.
Thank you. I think Alex, gives me the sign it's time. Thank you for listening. 60 minutes, even a bit more than 60 minutes, I'm afraid. I hope it was entertaining enough. I hope it was informative enough. I wish the entrepreneurs, Victor and Chris, good luck with your firms and with your investments, and we'll be looking closely. And obviously, if everyone supports you, then this should work. Ron, continue to do your good work, and don't be afraid if Europe copycats some of the good ideas that Israel has produced with the chief scientists. Good luck, and thank you, Itzik, for coming. Good luck. I guess the two of you have something in common. You want to overcome a certain attitude, and so both of you, good luck, because I guess not only Israel, but the region needs peace and prosperity. Thank you all for coming, and have a good afternoon. And there's lunch waiting outside for you. Thank you.
Before you all go to lunch, you may have noticed that on the program from 3 till 4 or something, I've written wrap-up session. I assume most of you won't be around.